The applause inside the grand ballroom sounded like rain against glasspolite, controlled, rehearsed. Crystal chandeliers burned above the audience like frozen stars, scattering light across polished shoes, silk dresses, and carefully practiced smiles. This was the kind of room where careers were crowned, where legacies were quietly weighed, where people pretended not to notice who was rising, and who was being slowly, deliberately forgotten. Dean Martin sat near the middle of the room, his posture relaxed, but his eyes alert. The way a man's become when he has lived long enough to recognize the difference between noise and meaning. To the younger faces scattered around him, he looked like comfort, familiar, safe, a name from another era. To himself, he felt something else entirely, a man still in motion, still creating, still hungry in a way that had nothing to do with fame and everything to do with purpose. The award ceremony rolled forward the way these things always did. Jokes, montages, standing ovations timed to swelling music, new stars being introduced as the future, old ones being thanked for everything they've given. The language of arrival and the language of departure, delivered in the same soft voice. Dean listened, smiled when politeness required it, nodded when names were spoken that had once sat beside his own on-call sheets and marquees, but he also felt it, the quiet shift in the room whenever youth was praised. The subtle leaning forward, the collective inhale, the hunger for what was new. And then came the moment. The host announced the next presenter, a breakout sensation. A man who, in just 2 years, had gone from anonymous auditions to magazine covers. A man whose name executives now spoke with the reverence once reserved for legends. He walked on stage, with the confidence of someone who had never yet been told no in a way that truly mattered. The audience applauded. Some enthusiastically, some strategically. Cameras found his smile. He adjusted his cuff, waited for the room to settle, and began. At first the monologue was harmless, self-deprecating, light, a few jokes about nerves, about his agent crying when he booked his first serious role. Laughter rolled gently through the room. Then he shifted. And of course, he said, glancing down at his card before looking back up, this industry wouldn't be what it is without the pioneers, the ones who walked so the rest of us could. Well, sprint. A ripple of chuckles. Guys like Dean Martin, he continued, pausing just long enough for the camera to cut to Dean's table. A true icon, a legend, a reminder that dreams really can last a lifetime, even after their expiration date. The laughter this time was louder, not cruel, but careless. Dean felt the sound reach him before the meaning did, like thunder before rain. He saw the smiles around him, the polite tilts of heads, the way some people laughed because they thought they were supposed to. The hotshot on stage wasn't finished, come on. He went on grinning, warming to the room. The man's been in the business longer than most of us have been alive. That's not a career, that's a historical landmark. I half expected to see him in the lobby with a tour guide and a plaque. More laughter. Cameras again. A close-up this time. Dean smiled, not because he was amused, but because he understood the moment perfectly. He had seen it before. He had seen it when silent film stars were teased by talkies, when stage giants were dismissed by screen idols, when black and white faces were replaced by color, and color by spectacle, and spectacle by whatever was faster, louder, newer. This wasn't about humor. It was about territory. The presenter glanced again at Dean, emboldened. Still, he said, lifting his hands as if offering a peace treaty, you've got to respect a man who just refuses to leave the party. So let's hear it for Dean Martin, proof that nostalgia never really dies. The applause that followed was strong. Too strong. The kind given to close a moment, not honor it. A stage assistant approached Dean's table with a microphone. A familiar ritual. A chance for the legend to say something charming, gracious, self-aware. The camera red light. Blinked. Dean rose slowly. There was no anger in his face. No embarrassment. No tightness around the eyes. He didn't rush. He didn't stall. He simply stood, adjusted his jacket, and took the microphone as if he were about to thank an old friend for a kind introduction. The room leaned in. "Dean," the host said gently, "would you like to respond?" Dean looked toward the stage, toward the young man still smiling. Still unaware that moments could be traps as well as platforms, Dean's voice, when he spoke, was calm, warm, almost amused. "We'll see," he said. 5 words. No explanation, no defense, no bite, just a quiet promise. A few people laughed, unsure. A few nodded politely. The presenter chuckled, relieved. "Fair enough," he said, tapping his card. "Fair enough." The show moved on, but something in the room had shifted. Not loudly, not visibly. Subtly, like 8. Pressure before a storm, Dean returned to his seat. A woman beside him leaned over, whispering that he'd handled it beautifully. A man across the table lifted his glass. Someone behind him patted his shoulder. Dean thanked them all, but his attention was already elsewhere. He wasn't thinking about the joke. He wasn't thinking about the applause. He was thinking about the script waiting on his desk at home. About the director who had called him not because he was famous, but because he was precise. About the small, independent film that no studio believed in yet. About the scene he'd rehearsed until 3 in the morning, because something in it felt unfinished. He was thinking about work, because work had always been his answer. The next morning, headlines rolled in like they always did after award nights. Best dressed lists, worst jokes, viral clips. The hotshots monologue was everywhere, shared, quoted, praised for being bold and honest and hilarious. The clip of Dean's reply traveled with it. "We'll see." Some called it classy. Some called it awkward. Some called it proof that Dean was finally becoming self-aware. Dean didn't read them. He was already on set. The film he was shooting didn't have a massive budget or a blockbuster cast. There were no luxury trailers, no armies of assistants. Just a lean crew, long days, and a story that demanded patience. Dean liked that. He liked being needed for substance instead of symbolism. Between takes, a young production assistant approached him, nervous, holding a phone. "Sir," she said, hesitating, "I just wanted to say, my dad grew up watching your movies. He says your work got him through some hard years." Dean smiled at her. Really smiled. "Then I did something right," he said, that afternoon. He filmed a scene that left the set silent when the director finally called cut. Not because it was loud, because it was honest. A moment about regret, about time, about the strange way pride and fear sometimes wear the same face. The cinematographer quietly wiped his eyes. No one posted that online. No trending clips. No punchlay. Just craft. Happening in a room. Meanwhile, across town, the hotshot was doing interviews. He was being congratulated. Being told his joke was fearless. Being encouraged to keep shaking things up. Every laugh was validation. Every headline another brick in the fast, glittering road being laid beneath his feet. When a reporter asked him about Dean's reply, he laughed. "Oh, he was cool about it," he said. "I think it's great. I mean, you've got to be able to laugh at yourself in this business." He meant it, which was the problem. That night, Dean went home, loosened his tie, poured himself a drink he didn't finish, and opened the script again. He sat by the window as the city dimmed, reading lines he already knew, marking pauses only he could hear it outside. Billboards changed, faces were replaced, names were updated, inside. Dean worked, because he knew something the room had forgotten. Time doesn't erase talent, it tests it, and somewhere, quietly, the test had already begun. The week after the awards show did not begin with thunder. It began with silence. Not the peaceful kind, not the restful kind, but the strange, weightless quiet that comes when something has shifted beneath the surface, and no one yet knows where the cracks will appear. For Dean Martin, the days unfolded the same way they always had. Early mornings, black coffee, script pages spread across a wooden desk worn smooth by decades of use. He rehearsed lines not out loud, but under his breath, shaping them, tasting them, letting them settle into his bones the way music once had. He had learned long ago that real work rarely announces itself. It simply waits. But outside his home, the world was moving differently. The clip from the awards show had not faded. It had multiplied. We'll see. 5 words. Now stitched into headlines, reaction videos, opinion columns, late-night jokes. Some people framed them as the perfect comeback. Others treated them like a relic's last grin. The hotshot's face was everywhere beside Dian's youth, an experience locked together in an image. The internet couldn't stop feeding on. And then, on the 3rd morning, after the ceremony, something unexpected happened. A trailer dropped. No press buildup. No massive marketing campaign. Just a quiet release from a small independent studios channel. A 2-minute clip. Dim lighting. No explosions. No famous franchises. The title card read, Stone River, starring Dean Martin. At first it barely moved. A few thousand views. A handful of comments, then someone shared it, then someone else. Then a film critic with a reputation for destroying. Careers retweeted it with 6 words, "This is not nostalgia. This is power." Within hours, the trailer was everywhere. People clicked, expecting something gentle, something safe. Something slow, what they saw instead unsettled them. Dean did not appear as a charming figure from memory. He appeared older, thinner, sharper. His eyes in the opening frame were not warm. They were heavy, the kind of eyes that had seen consequences and were no longer interested in pretending otherwise. The trailer showed him standing, alone in a dry riverbed. Wind pulling at his coat, dust moving like smoke around his feet. His voice came next, low and steady. "You don't outlive your mistakes," he said. "You carry them. And some days, they get heavy." The music swelled. Scenes cut faster. A confrontation in a kitchen lit by a single bulb. A trembling hand hovering over a door. A quiet moment where his character sat beside a hospital bed, saying nothing, doing everything. By the time the trailer ended, people were leaning toward their screens, not smiling, listening. The comments changed tone first. "Why is this hitting so hard? I didn't know Dean Martin could do this." Real. By the end of the day, entertainment blogs were calling it unexpected, then uncomfortable, then impossible to ignore. A respected trade magazine posted a still frame from the trailer, one where Dean's character stands in the rain, eyes lifted but empty. Their caption read, "Some performances arrive, others remain." On set, Dean didn't know any of this yet. He was in the middle of filming an unbroken scene that required him to walk the length of an old warehouse while delivering a monologue about choices that could never be returned. The director hadn't called cut. The crew barely breathed. Dean's voice did not rise. It deepened. Each sentence landed not like a speech, but like a confession. When it ended, no one moved. Finally, the director whispered, "Cut." And then, unexpectedly, the sound engineer began to clap slowly, one by one. Others joined. Not celebration. Recognition. Dean nodded once, thanked them quietly, and went back to his chair. That was when his phone began to vibrate once, twice. Again, the director glanced at the screen. Then at Dean. "You might want to see this," said. Dean took the phone, scroll, and for the first time since the awards show, he understood. Meanwhile, across the city, the Hotshot's week was unfolding very differently. At first, he enjoyed the attention. His monologue was still being replayed. Interviews were still being scheduled. He leaned into it, joking about stirring the pot, about not letting legends get too comfortable. But then the questions changed. Have you seen Dean Martin's new trailer? What do you think about people calling his upcoming performance awards level? Do you feel any pressure being compared to him this week? He laughed them off at first. "Hey, good for him," he said in one interview. "It's great when people from earlier generations get moments like this." Earlier generations, the phrase traveled, so did the trailer, and suddenly his own posts weren't moving the same way. Clips of his jokes now sat beneath videos dissecting Dean's performance. Fan pages that had once quoted him were now sharing. Stills from Stone River with captions about real acting and craft and presence. Wasn't an attack, which made it worse. It was a shift. Studios noticed first. A director quietly postponed a meeting. A producer's tone cooled on the phone. A role he'd been verbally promised was suddenly still under discussion. Then came the article. A respected critic published a long piece titled, "The Difference Between Noise and Gravity." It didn't insult anyone. It didn't praise anyone loudly. It simply compared. And in that comparison, something heavy took shape. "He is everywhere," the critic wrote, "but he is not yet anywhere." Dean Martin, in contrast, seems to be standing in a place the camera cannot leave. By evening, the hotshot had read it 6 times. He told himself it didn't matter. But that night, when he stood alone in his apartment, lights off, city glowing beyond the glass, he opened the trailer again and watched. This time, not as competition, as a student. He noticed things he hadn't before. The stillness. The restraint. The way Dean didn't perform emotion. He let it find him, for the first time since his rise began. The hotshot felt something unfamiliar settle into his chest. Not anger, fear. Because fear does not come when something is taken from you. It comes when something is revealed by the end of the week. Stone River was being called the quietest storm of the year. Private screenings were packed. Executives who hadn't returned Dean's calls in years were suddenly requesting dinners. Critics who'd once spoken about him in the past tense were rewriting their language. And through it all, Dean said very little. When a reporter finally cornered him outside the studio and asked, "Dean, after what happened at the awards show, do you feel this is your response?" Dean paused, looked at the camera, and shook his head gently. "This," he said, "is just my work." Then he walked back inside. Behind him, the city kept talking, but somewhere deeper beneath the noise, something undeniable had begun. The promise of 5 quiet words was unfolding, and the industry was starting to realize. The week wasn't ending, it was opening. Fame does not disappear the way people expect. It doesn't explode. It doesn't announce its departure. It thins, and in that thinning, something far more frightening takes place. People stop asking. The hotshot noticed it on a Tuesday, not because his phone stopped ringing. It didn't. Messages were still coming. Notifications still glowed. His name still trended. But the messages had changed. They were shorter, less certain. Maybe next month. Let's circle back. We're adjusting direction. The words were professional, polite, soft, and heavy. He sat in his apartment, the same place where only weeks ago he'd practiced award show smiles in the mirror and refreshed his email again. The screen filled with noise, brand requests, small interviews, podcast invites, but the big ones were missing. The conversations that build futures. Across town, a different silence lived in a different room. On Dean Martin's set, silence meant attention. It meant the crew leaning forward. It meant the director not interrupting. It meant a scene had gone somewhere no one wanted to disturb. That morning, Dean was filming a moment that had not existed in the first draft of the script. It had been added after weeks of rehearsal, a quiet, devastating exchange between his character and a young man, who reminded him of who he once had been. The young actor struggled through the first takes. He pushed emotion, forced intensity, tried to impress. Dean said nothing. On the 4th take, Dean quietly asked if they could start again, this time when the cameras rolled. He did something different. He lowered his voice. He slowed his breathing. He waited, and in that waiting, the young actor forgot to perform. His shoulders dropped. His eyes filled without command. His words broke not from effort, but from recognition. When the scene ended, the young man couldn't speak. Neither could most of the crew. Later, in a corner near the craft table, he approached Dean. "I didn't even know I was holding all that," he said quietly. Dean smiled. Most people don't. That scene would never go viral, but it would be remembered meanwhile. The hotshot's remembering had begun too, only his was different. It came not in craft, but in consequence. A studio he'd expected to headline quietly replaced him on a project announcement. The press release praised a bold new direction. His name wasn't mentioned. A producer he'd joked with for years sent a message that ended with, "We'll talk soon." They didn't. The night he realized it wasn't coincidence, he sat in his car outside a restaurant he'd once been ushered into without reservation. Now, he waited 10 minutes, then 15, through the glass. He could see a group laughing around a corner table. He recognized two of them. People who had once called him unstoppable. They didn't see him, or pretended not to. He left before the host returned at home. He poured a drink he didn't want, sat on the floor instead of the couch, and scrolled. And there it was again. Dean, a new clip from Stone River had been released. Not a trailer. A scene 2 minutes long. No music, no editing, just Dean's face as his character listened to someone tell him something he had already known, but had never allowed himself to hear. The camera didn't move. The room behind him. It didn't matter. What mattered was the way his eyes changed, how regret passed through, how resistance rose, how surrender finally arrived. The clip had millions of views, but what unsettled the hotshot was the comment section. "I didn't breathe. This feels like someone talking to me. I forgot I was watching a movie." And beneath them, again and again, "This is what acting is." He closed the app, stood, walked to the mirror, and for the first time since he'd arrived in this city, he didn't recognize who was looking back. Not because fame had changed him, because it had never asked him to. He remembered his first acting class. The folding chairs, the bad lighting. The instructor who had said, "If you want attention, go somewhere else. If you want truth, stay." He had stayed for a while, then attention arrived, and he followed it. The next morning, the call finally came, not from a studio, from his agent. Her voice was gentle, which scared him more than anger. "They're pausing on 2 projects," she said. Nothing official, just pauses. "Why?" He asked, a breath on the line. "They want to see what you do next." He hung up without answering across the city. Dean sat in a quiet screening room. Stone River had just finished playing for a small audience of critics and filmmakers. The lights were still down. No one spoke. Then someone in the back stood. It was a director known for spectacle, for volume, for careers built on momentum. "I've been doing this 30 years, he said. "I forgot this feeling." He sat back down. Afterward, as people slowly filed out, a woman from a major studio approached Dean. "We have a script," she said. "It wasn't written with you in mind. It is now." Dean thanked her, asked who wrote it. She told him. He nodded. "Tell them I'd like to read it quietly," he said. "No negotiation, no performance, just work." That night, the hotshot went somewhere he hadn't been in years. An old theater. It smelled like dust and wood and something unfinished. A handwritten sign by the door read, "Workshop. Open scene night inside." 12 people sat in a circle. No cameras. Press. No recognition. He almost turned around. Then he remembered the comment he'd made on stage, historical landmark. He took a seat when his turn came. He stood, heart beating harder than any red carpet ever had, and read a scene he hadn't touched since before he was known. His voice shook. Not because he was bad, because he was honest when he finished. No one clapped. They didn't need to. A woman across from him said quietly, "Where did you learn to listen like that?" He opened his mouth, then closed it. "I forgot," he said. That same night, Dean sat alone at his desk. Reading a new script. Outside, the city pulsed. Inside, the words did. He reached a page near the middle, paused, and smiled faintly. The character had a line that read, "Some men build echoes. Others build rooms." Dean leaned back, and somewhere in the city, without knowing why, The hotshot felt something shift again. Not downward, inward. The applause was thinning, but something else was beginning, and it was heavier. The premiere did not look like a storm. There were no screaming crowds pressed against barricades. No searchlights tearing open the sky. No marching lines of photographers shouting names instead. The Nightstone River first screened publicly arrived almost quietly. A restored downtown theater. Warm lights. A modest red carpet. Invitations printed on heavy cream paper instead of glowing screens. It was the kind of event people used to attend because they wanted to feel something, not because they wanted to be seen. Dean Martin arrived early. He always did, not for press, not for placement, but because he liked to sit alone in the empty room before people filled it. He liked the smell of seats before perfume touched them, the way a theater breathed when it had not yet been told what it would hold. He took a place near the back, folded his hands, waited across the city. The hotshot stood in a bathroom he didn't recognize. A small, independent venue. Peeling paint. A crooked mirror. The kind of place he had once performed before anyone cared who he was. He stared at himself and tried to slow his breathing. He hadn't been invited to the premiere. He hadn't asked to go. He had bought a ticket. 3 rows from the front. He told himself it was curiosity, but the truth sat closer. He needed to understand. The theater filled gradually, not with spectacle, but with gravity. Directors, writers, actors, people would learn the difference between being entertained and being changed. No, one announced Dean. No one needed to when the lights dimmed. A quiet settled that felt different from silence. It felt like permission. The film began. Stone River did not open with music. It opened with wind, dry, lonely wind moving through tall grass. A man's footsteps, slow, uneven, and then Dean's face. Older than any audience had ever seen it, unprotected by lighting, unsoftened by memory, he did not speak for nearly 3 minutes, and somehow, no one moved. The story unfolded patiently. A man returning to a town he had once fled, a past that did not accuse him, only waited. Relationships not repaired, only reopened. Each scene added weight instead of volume. Halfway through, in the moment, Dean had rehearsed until his throat ached. His character finally said what he had been carrying. "I thought time was a distance," he said. "Turns out, it's a room, and everything you don't face waits inside." In the theater, someone exhaled sharply near the front. The hotshot leaned forward, elbows on knees, eyes fixed. Chest tight, he forgot himself. He forgot reputation. He forgot the week he watched. When the final scene ended, there was no dramatic finish. No swelling triumph. Just Dean's character standing at the edge of the Stone River. Shoes in his hands, water moving past his feet, uncertain, unfinished. The screen went dark. For a moment, no one clapped, then someone in the back stood, then another, and another. The applause rose, not like celebration, but like acknowledgement. Dean did not stand. He stayed where he was, eyes lowered, letting the sound pass him rather than fill him. Backstage. A journalist approached him later. "Dean," she said, "people are calling this the performance of your life. After everything that was said last week, do you feel this is vindication?" Dean looked at her, really looked. "No," he said. "It's continuation." She waited. "So what did you mean," she asked, "when you said, 'We'll see'?" Dean smiled. "Not the public one, the real one." "I meant," he said slowly, "we'll see what remains when the noise is done talking." Across the lobby, the hotshot stood, alone by a poster for the film. Not posing, not waiting, just standing. He watched as people passed him without recognition. Not because he was invisible, because tonight he was irrelevant, and he had never felt more awake. He left before the crowd did, outside. The night air felt cooler than it had in months. He walked no driver, no calls, no posts, just footsteps. The next morning, headlines were everywhere. Not loud, certain. Dean Martin delivers career-defining performance. Stone River stuns industry. Not a comeback. A reminder. Studios released statements. Festivals requested premieres. Awards conversations began quietly, then grew. Dean returned to his desk, opened a new script, and worked. 3 days later, the hotshot published something for the first time in weeks. No joke, no photo, no branding. Just words. I once thought winning meant being heard the loudest. Now I think it means learning to listen. I'm going back to where I started. There was no announcement, but people noticed. Months passed. Stone River became one of those films. People referenced without being asked. Scenes were studied. Lines were quoted. Not for fashion, for understanding. Dean declined several high-profile offers. Accepted one small, difficult role in a theater production no one expected him to touch. On opening night, seated 3 rows from the front, was a man no one pointed out. The hotshot he applauded first and longest. After the performance, he waited not for a photo. For a moment when Dean emerged into the narrow hallway, coat in hand. The young man stepped forward. "Mr. Martin?" he said. Dean turned. Recognized him. Not from headlines, from the night that had started. Everything the hotshot hesitated, then spoke. "I wanted to say I was wrong." Dean studied him. Not as an icon, as a man. About what? Dean asked. "About thinking this ends," the hotshot said. "About thinking something new replaces. Something real." Dean was quiet. Then he nodded once. "Good." He said they stood there too. Careers at different distances from the same. "Truth," the hotshot swallowed. "When you said, 'we'll see'? I thought you meant we'd see who wins." Dean's eyes softened. "I meant," he said, "we'll see who stays." He extended his hand. The hotshot took it. And in that simple gesture, something heavier than applause passed between them. Because in an industry built on arrival, Dean Martin had reminded them of endurance. And in 5 quiet words, he had never threatened a career. He had simply let time speak.